That was quite a highly discussed research paper just about 10 years ago. And obviously many of you know sort of there are applications out there. ShopSavvy is one of them. And it's interesting, they're very much in line with the functionality that has been proposed, but it's much nicer packaged nowadays. And it's also a good question, does this research that was published in 1999 have anything to do with that product that was created? Probably you can't trace a line back that there was a researcher there and there. But I think, as in many of the other examples, without the research, it would have been probably not happened. The research in that domain is required, but it's really hard to make with the research done in that domain a direct impact. So we see a lot of this research is done, but exploited by completely different people, by completely different companies. And another point I won't go into much detail is patenting Ubicomp is something which seems pretty hard, at least from our perspective, what we have seen. Patenting this stuff seems pretty hard, and that sort of makes it really difficult, that you sort of get sort of the benefit of doing the research. Another example, and that's my first experience in creating mobile devices, and it's interesting. The first mobile device I worked with was an Apple. It was an Apple Newton at that time. And again, sort of thinking about this notion of mobile phones have become PDAs, it's not so surprising that companies who have been early successful in the PDA market have sort of a success again. It's not that somebody like Apple has put out the iPhone without any history in that domain. And perhaps some of you have used those. It was quite a bulky device, but what we did in that, adding sensors. And obviously that was not the only sensors we added. We figured out that's quite nice if the screen turns. And then we had a project, and I've seen some people around who may have been on that project as well. It was a European project, T, putting sensors into mobile phones. In the US, Microsoft Research put sensors into PDAs. And again, this is now 10 years ago. We see now a lot of devices that come with sensors. And there was something on how to optimize screen rotation with tilting on Android devices. And probably many of you know this iBeer app. And it's interesting, it reminded me of some discussion we had, what can you do with an acceleration sensor on a phone? Not a lot. And I think this iBeer application shows that sort of a lot of people had a similar problem in finding useful applications. Another example, also from that European project in 2000, was things like, oh, you put your context, at this time we call it context, nowadays you call it status, oh, I'm busy, I'm working, I'm at home. And if you call somebody, before the call was put through to that person, you got the question, oh, that person is at home, do you want to call him? Or you get a status message directly included in the in the phone book, or is that Facebook? Because that's on the next slide. And I think that's something we have seen over the last years happening massively in social networks. Again, sort of, there is no direct relationship between that research and those things happening. But I think by this research, a mindset was created that had a lot of people thinking about this. And obviously, those things change over the time, and also with the technologies. But it shows that the research has already given indication where things are going to go. And if you look back, it's sort of, the interface is very, very different, but I think from a conceptual part, a lot of the discussion has happened at that time. In summary on that first part, there was a lot of Ubicomp research published, and it's interesting. And it's not only those few examples I have in there, that many of those things pop up about 10 years later in products. And not necessarily by the people who did those products, that's the research. And it's interesting, many of the developments which seem to be quite surprising, at least received from the market, are less surprising if you know the history or the literature. And one last point is, what we see a lot is, when it has become a product, it's not Ubicomp anymore. It's basically, Ubicomp is always the thing we have not reached yet. So that label Ubicomp is sort of, seems to be reserved for the research part, not for the product part. Okay, now let's think, where do we want to go with business in that direction? And one main point I would argue here is that Ubicomp technology itself is changing the values and understanding of technology. And because it's not about functionality, it's about usable functionality that becomes important. And that has to do because we can better understand what other people do with devices. And again, this has to do with Ubicomp. So functionality as a basic thing is not discriminative. So the quality of a DVD player from different manufacturers is very likely to be the same because it's very likely that they use similar chips or even the same chips. Similar, the quality of a phone call is very, very similar across phones. It may vary on the network. The quality of a television, again, is very similar between manufacturers. So in the end, it's not the functionality itself, it's the functionality people are able to use. And one interesting point what we see, and that relates back to that one research project from '99, which we see now hitting the market, is that people have, at the point of sale, they make choices which are informed by either what their colleagues have, what their friends have, and just if you use Facebook, just put in there, oh, I'm traveling to, let's say, for a swimming holiday, what camera should I get? Probably 50 of your friends will reply you what they think is a good camera, or put in, I'm in the shop thinking if I should get the iPad with 64 or 16 megabyte. Probably again, 10 of your friends will probably within 5 minutes give you sort of an answer and probably a reason why one or the other. And I think we see this point that people are more informed when they make choices, and one prediction is that quality, and not quality in absolute terms, but quality as a perceived thing, may have a harder, a stronger impact on what people buy in the end. And that's why I like that previous presentation quite a bit, sort of happy or not, I think that will play a huge role, because the moment we measure those things, and we measure how happy people with a product are, this will hit back at companies who produce products that are not happy. And we see this already in areas like hotels, with things like TripAdvisor, where negative ratings in there can hurt your business seriously. And the other argument I make here is Ubicomp is changing the value chain and the product structures. So I have there a complicated sentence, so I read it and I don't get it wrong. Devices, services, and content will create large revenue, but it will not create revenue in the large. What do I mean with this? If you look at things like the App Store, the overall turnaround in the App Store for the iPhone is huge. The turnaround for single companies in there is rather small. So it feeds one developer, sometimes it feeds 5 developers, sometimes a few more. But a majority of people contributing there sort of feed themselves on a different job. So what we see there is a huge amount of money turned over, but by many small chunks. And it's interesting, many small developers will make sort of their small cut in there, but probably very few large companies will make a big cut in there. Obviously, one company does, and those are the ones who own the platform, or the meta service, as I call it. And I think if you look at bigger companies, I think platform and meta services are the key to revenue in the large. So if you start up a company that's producing an app, a service, it's very likely that you sort of may be successful if it's a good idea. But that you become the next Microsoft, the next Google, it's very, very unlikely.